Hi guys, I wanted to show you a quick video about working with Photoshop to create your own unique shapes. So this is going to be a tutorial about setting up those files and then using the pen tool and then exporting them. So our intention is to create these shapes in Photoshop that we will then export as an SVG file. It's a scalable vector graphic is what it's called. And those kinds of files can be brought into Tinkercad. So it's a really exciting way to take your own unique designs and then bring them into Tinkercad and turn them into 3D models. So you will all use this in some way, and the extent to which you use your own created shapes is really up to you. So you'll see, that's what you'll see in this process. The shapes that we're going to create are extrusions. So we've gone over that in class, the difference between kind of volumes and extrusions. And so what you're making will be an extrusion. So on the screen here, I have a bed bug, that's appealing, that I put as an image. But just to show you quickly to set up your files, you'll do File, New. And when you're bringing things into Tinkercad, there's a maximum width of 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. I actually think the resolution is maybe 150, but I'm not positive. So anyway, don't set your just set your file up as 1,000 by 1,300. It can be color, 8-bit. That's all fine. And if it says inches, you can click here and turn it to pixels. So this will be our working space. On this file, I just brought in an image. So let's say you could scan one of your sketches, perhaps, or you could even work maybe directly on top of one of your photos for some of your shapes if you wanted to try to trace a particular shape. So here I just have that layer. I'm going to add a new layer. And I might even lock this layer right here so that you won't be able to edit it. So on this top layer, I'm going to go ahead and use the pen tool. So let me move this over. Let me close this. Okay. So over here is the pen tool, right here. Click on that. And the logic of the pen tool, let's get rid of this layer just to show you. I'm going to make a new layer. You don't have to do this, but okay. So the logic of the pen tool is that it allows you to draw freely. So some people get a little snagged with the pen tool, so I just want to show you how it works. Over here, if you hold down the mouse, you'll see you have all of these different options. There's a free-form pen tool. So you can kind of draw freely with it. And it creates all of these things called anchor points. When you free draw, it's a little bit of a, I don't know, more free hand-drawn design, which you might not want. So I'm going to show you the other function. So if you just go to the normal pen tool, one of the important things to do is to look up here. Okay, so if you want to create a shape, it needs to have some kind of a fill that you can see. I'm just going to use black so you can see it. And then the stroke you can leave off. I'll show you a variation in a minute. Basically, the fill is what the color is filled with, and then the stroke is like the outline. So up here you can see all the options that you can choose from. I'm going to have just a fill. So the way that a pen tool works is that when I click, I get this anchor point, which is what this is. And then if I click again, it creates a line between those two anchor points. So if I'm trying to create shapes, I can click to create these shapes. And then when I want to close in that shape, which you do need to close in your shapes, I go back to where I started, and you can see that little circle next to the pen. See, it shows up. That means I'm completing the shape, so I click. And now if I go to my move tool, I'm just going to move it around. You can see that I have this one shape, okay? So a minute ago when I was clicking, I just was clicking, moving, clicking, moving, clicking. If you just click once, you create an anchor point. And that anchor point is a point, literally. It's an angle so that the lines meet up and they create a point. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to go back to my pen tool. But if I click and I drag, you can see what I get are these new little things called handles. These are called handles. Click and drag. See all those? And what handles do is they're sort of like bicycle handles if you want to think about them. They allow you to kind of steer the direction of the curve. So you can create your shape initially by dragging and dropping anchor points and pulling out handles. But then you might want to go back and edit those. So that's when we have to go back over here. So down here, there are two arrows. One is a path selection tool. You can see it selects just the basic shape. That's the black arrow. The other is the direct selection tool. And that allows you to select the anchor points themselves. So the white arrow is the direct selection tool. So if I go back and I click on those individual anchor points, I can move them around to reshape my design. I can also pull the handles to drag them around. If I hold down Option while I'm dragging my handle, I'll only drag one handle. See that? And you can kind of reshape these to make them the shape that you want. Okay? Let's say that I decide that I don't really like this little dent here. Under the pen tool, there are all these other options. Add anchor point, delete anchor point, convert point tool. So add anchor point does exactly what it says. It's that it adds an anchor point. So you can see now we've got new anchor points if I need more. Delete anchor point does just what it says, deletes the anchor points. So let's say I don't need this one. I'm going to delete those. Deletes my anchor points. Okay. And then convert anchor point. Let me draw you a new one just to show you. I'll make a straight edged one with maybe one curve. Okay. So convert anchor point here. If I click on a point that is an angle with no handles, I can click and drag and it'll allow me to add handles to an anchor point that doesn't already have them. Or if I click on one that already has handles, it'll turn it into one without. So that one got rid of the anchor point, the handles. Okay, I'm going to go back to my pen tool. So I'm going to delete these two. And then let's just talk about some logic. Oftentimes when students are just beginning to draw with the pen tool, they put way too many anchor points than what you really need. If you're going to draw a circle, for instance, ideally you need 4 anchor points. So 1, 2, this won't be a perfect circle, but that's okay. Oops. So 4, right? So with 4 anchor points, I can make a pretty decent circle. I could always go back in, right, with my little tool and pull the curves around to try to make this look more circular, to make it kind of more perfect. I'm not going to worry about perfection right now. I just want to show you that. So try drawing a circle in Photoshop and kind of play with it and see what you need. Another good rule of thumb is that if you're trying to create a curve like we see here, you want the handle to be not more than about 1/3 of the distance between the 2 anchor points where you're trying to create a curve. That's a good rule of thumb because I think when a lot of students first start drawing with a pen tool, they drag out these huge handles and then it just makes the shape really distorted and really hard to control because your handles are just way too long. So it's good to just start with shorter handles, and kind of try to remember that third rule so that it's not so hard to control those spaces and those curves in between the different anchor points. So about a third of the distance between two curves, okay? So I'm going to bring up that image again. And let's say I wanted to create this shape or this shape here. You can zoom way in. My image is really blurry, but it's not really gonna matter. So I have this image showing, and then I have a layer above it that's a clear layer. Basically, that's what that checkerboard means, so that I can see the layer below. So I can just start to draw directly on top of my image, and this might be your sketch, or it might even be the photograph. To duplicate some of those shapes. Remember, we're not trying to get a photographic representation of this thing, so it's probably better for you to be drawing from your sketches because those are a bit of a distortion or an abstraction of this original form. But if you wanted to do this for some things, I think that that's perfectly fine. Just keep it in check, right? Like, know that you're trying to create an abstraction. So if I just went around and traced this whole thing, that wouldn't really be a good solution, you know? But I also think it might be useful for you to have shapes that are specifically from the thing that you're drawing so that there is some like really solid referential quality to those. You can see here I maybe put too many anchor points. I kind of like this side better than this side. So I'm going to go and just delete that anchor point that I had. Let's see, I'm going to delete this one and then I'll bring this one down. Try to shape it to what I want it to be. Okay? All right, so what I want to do is I want to export this shape into Tinkercad so it can be a part of my design. So when I do that, you don't want to give it all this other information. You want just that shape by itself. So I'm just going to delete this layer for myself. And then I don't need all this extra space, so I'm going to crop this. So 5 tools down is your crop tool. And I'm just going to draw around that shape pretty close. You don't need any of that extra stuff in there. And you want your background to be transparent, so be sure it looks like that checkerboard, okay? And then now here's the trick. You must export this as an SVG file or it will not work, okay? So I'm going to go to File and Export, Export As, export as an SVG right here. Okay. You have to make sure that this is under 1,000 pixels, which it is. And then I'm going to hit Export All. I'm going to name it something that I can find in a place where I can find it. So I'm just going to put mine on my desktop. And it's saved. Okay. So now when I go into Tinkercad, here's my Tinkercad workspace, which you should be familiar with. I can go to Import, choose a file, Bug, and then Import. And here's my shape that I drew. Let me turn the board so you can see it. So there's my shape that I drew. Isn't that cool? So now this is what we call an extrusion. So it doesn't have the same kind of volume as something like this, but it has our general shape, and then we can increase or decrease the depth of this part here. So I can shrink it down to make it super thin, like paper thin. I can raise it up. And then you can treat this like any other shape that you use in Tinkercad. So I can combine it with other shapes if I want to. I can, you know, poke holes out of it if I want to. So let's make that a hole just for fun. Group those guys. Poked a hole out of my shape there. So it acts like all other shapes that are available in Tinkercad, but they're uniquely your own, which I think is really important when you're creating designs like we are. Okay, so walk through some of the steps of the pen tool. Be sure that you understand how to use it. Know that you can trace over your sketches, which could be useful. And then remember to export as an SVG file that's less than 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. And then you can import those into Tinkercad to work with. And that's it.